Friday, February 10th, 2012. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Chair Wolf.
Here.
Member West. Here. Member Costa.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great. Just note that when we make any votes, that I get called last. Okay, great. Okay, agenda review. Anything for the good of the cause on the agenda? No? Jackson? No? Okay. All right, so we will hold by acclamation without objection. The agenda is in order. And if you can read item number 3, please.
Item number 3, discuss and approve scope.
Okay, so this is just to kind of get an idea of what our committee is, what we plan on doing with it, how wide a net we want to cast, or how narrow a focus we want to be. We have some items of interest that I thought might be a good place to start, but I think overall we should at least have a broad scope, and we should discuss what that is. That way, we're not overtaxing ourselves, but we're able to get enough work done that's meaningful, and that's meaningful for the public and for the task force and for the city staff, because ultimately a lot of this is going to affect them. So I'll just open it. I'll just suspend Robert's rules. We could just have a, just a informal conversation about it.
I mean, this is a very broad sentiment, but maybe can just kick us off. I mean, I see this committee as being tremendously important. I might even argue one of the most important of the task force, because increasingly issues of open government are becoming issues of technology. And I think that, this is a void that I'm really excited we're finally kind of stepping in to fill. I think that this is something, this is an area that, we need to be thinking about a lot more as a task force. And I think, it's going to be our place to sort of lead the charge and like showing the task force where to go, because I don't know that it's necessarily all of the issues present are things that all of the other members are thinking about currently, but I think that they need to be. And so I guess where I would take that is, I think it's important to define specific things that we feel like we can achieve, but I also think that we can kind of paint the scope of this committee fairly broadly, to think about any areas where we feel like we can put the fingerprint of open government in all things technology.
Right. Anything you want to say?
Yeah. I mean, I would only say that my goals are...
Is this microphone on? Hold on.
Yes, it's on. Oh, you can get there.
Sorry. I would say a goal would basically be as advocates for technology to help city agencies and the public access public records. I'm not necessarily sure necessarily the sort of ideal way to accomplish that right now, but certainly I could see our role weighing in on specific decisions.
Just want to give you a little background. When I first came to the task force in 2005, there were some issues that a member of the public had brought up when he started receiving electronic documents like PDFs, and he was looking for the metadata that was in the PDF, like where's the track changes, or were there any notes, or even just the pure headers as to who created it, what date was it originally created, that kind of stuff. And the departments didn't know what we were talking about, and the task force didn't know what we were talking about, and I brought in an expert to give us about an hour's presentation about what metadata is and how it spans everything from a PDF to a Word document to an email to even to an image. And so that was kind of the beginnings of where we started talking about technology, and this is kind of like it's taken this long, some 7 years later, to have a discussion about it and get something rolling. So I think one of the scopes that we need to look at is, just to be a little more tangible and concrete, is just, file formats. I think we need to pay attention to file formats. We've had in the international world, there's been this huge debate, not even a debate, there was a huge debacle on whether to use open document format or Microsoft XML, which is the docx that you see around now. And as it turned out, when the International Standards Organization were making their decisions, Microsoft had lobbied each and every one of those members and bribed them to accept the Microsoft format, while everybody else in the world uses the open document format. So we can see how those kinds of things can have a huge effect on what we do across the board, and it forces everybody to have to use one product and one product only. I'd hate to have to see the day where the city says, these documents are only available in Microsoft format, and you can only use Microsoft products in order to read it. And that would be a terrible access issue. So now they have converters to actually read ODFs of any sort. So I think, file format is very important. And it could be either for text documents or for images or for, let's talk about the streaming a little bit. So there's a problem with that because they specifically use Silverlight, Microsoft Silverlight, which is specifically a Microsoft format. And while there is a product that will work for Mac, and I forgot what it's called, it's like Moonlight or something like that, nobody's maintaining it anymore. So now those people on different operating systems are stuck. They can't watch streaming video because there's no Silverlight plugin for their browser or for their operating system. So already we're dealing with luckily we haven't had a question about that because I think still most people use Windows products, but eventually, like me, I don't use any Windows products. I use Mac and I use Linux and Android. So, if they're not going to produce it in Flash, which is bad enough as it is, but at least it's cross-platform, I don't know what's going to happen. So that's another example of file format that we need to deal with. And then the other scope is tracking. And I just want to leave that as a broad, because tracking goes to both what's happening city-wide, system-wide, and what's happening within the task force itself. So we could have many different sub-levels of tracking. So we're going to be talking about the orders of determination and creating a database based upon what Member Costa had introduced at the last meeting, and I think tracking, document tracking, file tracking, whatever you want to, we could term it officially later, but I think tracking in general will be important. In another area of scope, I think would be in backup and restoral. We're going to talk a little bit about it, but I think in general it just needs to be part of our scope. It's like, this is what we're creating as our charge, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else?
I wonder whether we might.
This is growing. It's a growing document,
sure.
So just feel free. It doesn't all have to be decided today.
I think something. A whole new line of questioning we might consider at task force hearings is into sort of the technological accessibility of records as they're provided. Mm-hmm. And we might want to consider, if we come across instances of, sure, documents have been provided, but they haven't been provided, for instance, maybe they're non-searchable PDFs or image PDFs or,
Right.
you know, I guess when we come across these issues of less than ideal implementation of technology, we might want to consider this body as a place where cases can get forwarded to talk with agencies about how they could improve their practices.
Okay. So something like oversight of technology issues.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else for the good of the cause at this moment? We can, again, it'll be an open list. If we find that as we're talking that some broad subject comes up, we can add it in there. Nothing else for the good of the cause? Okay. So let's move to the next item, Madam Clerk.
Item number 4, items of interest, orders determination database project, open documents in new city enterprise system, presentation by DT, standardized index of records for all departments, review records retention including backup restore policies, recommend policy amendments and procedures, timeline.
Okay, thank you. The person from Department of Technology, I tried to contact them several times. I've gotten over the past 3 weeks, I've gotten no response. So I have a feeling I'm going to have to go down there and knock on somebody's door. I've made phone calls, sent emails, so and there's really only one person to speak to about it. It's Brian Roberts. So they may be going through some stuff. I don't know. So what we'll do is I'll explain. There is a regular meeting, a committee meeting called the COIT, the Committee on IT. What's interesting about this meeting is this is the one meeting where every single department head comes to this meeting. So if you've never seen or met any of the department heads in the city and county, this is where you can see them all in one room for some hours. And here's where they express their fears and their accolades over trying to organize document management in the city much better to help reduce costs, to help reduce stress on their staff, and to help reduce equipment costs. Conversely, there are some departments that don't want to change. They've spent tons of money to develop, highly specialized applications, programs, like the hospital per se. But the city felt it was absolutely necessary to do this with the advent of virtualization. Virtualization for members of the public is a virtual container of which a whole server or a whole operating system or any other kind of application can live independent of anything else on the same bare metal, the same physical box. And you can have as many of these virtual machines open or working at the same time, depending upon how much resources you have, like RAM and hard drive space and CPU speed and all that kind of stuff. So it really helps reduce a lot of cost for the IT professional who's trying to keep a budget. But it also demands a lot of centralization, and there's a lot of fears around centralization. So, but it's been moving along. It's been ongoing for about 2 years now that I've been going to those meetings, and they awarded a contract to Microsoft, of course. And I say of course because that's who they always give the contracts to. And they're going to be using SharePoint. SharePoint is a kind of a standard around the world for document sharing, and Microsoft has done a pretty good job at it. The San Francisco Unified School District uses it, and I've seen it in action there when I served on a budget committee there for about 4 years. And it did make things a lot easier. It's a little hard to navigate, so you have to be somewhat of an artist, to figure out how the taxonomy has got to be to, how to organize document management. It's a very terse kind of linear kind of way of thinking. But once you get it, then it's very easy for anybody to navigate. So, that is what I want to get us introduced to, because that's where we want to try and fold the current index of records into that space, and at the same time provide every custodian of records, that means every city employee that is covered under sunshine, to be able to post public records as they make them. They just show up, once they've finalized them or what have you, or the department has finalized it, or commission or what have you. So, I want to. We'll talk about that in B a little bit more, but I just wanted to express that that person is not going to be here today. So let's start with A, the Orders of Determination Database Project. Why don't you take it away, Member Costa, and
Sure.
we'll get rolling on that.
So, I mean, essentially the idea is to break down our orders in some sort of using some sort of standardized schema that would allow that to be searched and, referenced later. Hopefully, that would be useful for a number of reasons. Probably one of the foremost being just a matter of referencing precedent when making decisions. Understanding the logic of past decisions. Hopefully, increasing the consistency of the task force decision-making process, but at the very least, having a more robust institutional memory. And so I think, especially given this new press release initiative that we have going, and the fact that we're starting to break down orders of determination this way, it won't be hard at all to start compiling this going forward. What will be hard is retroactively capturing decisions, just because they're not and really haven't been recorded in a very standardized manner. That said, it's not an insurmountable problem. It's just going to take a little bit of programming, probably, to build a script that would essentially collect the data in the way that we need to collect the data. And so I know we've tossed the idea around casually about, potentially having a hackathon or something like that to see if we can leverage the skills of people in the community to just do that. I don't think it would necessarily take more than a day. It's just having focused energy on it. So yeah, I think that probably summarizes it.
Yeah, I would say the essential difficulty is just in collecting the data set, I would think, for now, and then, or figuring out a public place to put it. My concern has been in the past, I feel like if we could work collectively on it in some non-meeting format, it wouldn't be that difficult to accomplish. However, that's not a realistic format. So,
But I would say that we can do that. We don't have to,
right.
If we're doing just work and we're not making any decisions,
Right.
it doesn't have to be a formal meeting.
Understood.
If there is a quorum of us,
Right.
we can call it a work meeting, and it just becomes open to the public, and it
Right.
just gets agendized, but it's not a meeting for
Sure.
that kind of thing. So I wouldn't worry about that too much.
Yeah.
As far, let me deal with the legalities of all that. But I think instead of getting too far ahead with scripting, I think one of the things we should, in database design, we need to talk about the design itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Because there are different ways to create a taxonomy. Like, how do you want it searched? How many different ways do you want it searched? Is every which way to midnight to search things? And we could do it by category. You could do it by code section. You could do it, you know, I mean, there's all kinds of ways to do it. You could do it by department,
Yeah.
you know, and luckily we're at a place right now where that's fairly easy to do. It's just that culling together the information, the question is how much of the information can be culled using a script versus how much actual physical, you know,
Manual.
finger hours
Yeah.
will it take.
And so the information exists in a form that's mildly structured, although not semantically structured. So the problem is essentially the first issue is to get a script just to compile all that information in one place. And then essentially the manual part will probably be, so yes, I mean, we will want to create a framework that has essentially more information that are contained in the documents in a way that are machine readable. But yeah, the first job is essentially, I mean, it is all of our minutes and all of the orders as determinations of our minutes exist as a complete data set on the website. It's my understanding.
Yeah.
So the first step would be essentially to collect all that in one place and at least translate whatever minimal structure there already exists in terms of date, in terms of, you know, sort of what's in the header that can be easily sort of semantically deduced as to what its meaning might be, and to create sort of a basic schema from that. And then we can then I would say we'd probably pick one piece, i.e. the item number or some unique identifier to serve as the relational key. And from there, we could span out sort of all sorts of details and, you know, make it human editable so that, you know, we can attach tags for section and code post facto or allow the public to do so easily enough. And yeah, I think that's the day's project, really. You know, I'm not necessarily sure I have the expertise to get it completely done, but, you know.
Well, the thing that we're looking at is there are Data SF, which is a nonprofit here in the city that is helping to make public a lot of the city's data as part of the Government 2.0 project. Nationally, we can organize a hackathon with them and run a 24-hour and
I mean,
that
yeah,
kind of
or
thing.
even if we could just get some of their expertise, I don't think it would be too terribly difficult.
Sure.
And I did some initial poking around in the past minutes and orders of determination, and I actually think we'll be able to get decently far if we spend a little bit of time understanding, like, they are actually pretty formally structured.
Yeah.
Just not across history. Like, there are sort of different eras you can kind of think of it, and, like, you know.
So that a little bit of manual intervention,
Yeah,
essentially
exactly.
cinching the input and making a few rules around what input period along time.
Yeah, exactly.
Would yeah. I mean, that makes perfect sense.
Okay, so moving ahead, what would you say if I think the best thing to do is to start with the most recent, because that's where the best technology is what's happening today, and then working our way backwards to see how many years back can we still manage to pull data off of a PDF or a Word document, if that's what's being used, or some other, whatever document is, how it's being saved in whatever system. And then the question then becomes is how does that translatable into their new system? And so I think so you have two things, is a time frame that is short term, and then obviously midterm, and then ultimately long term for the compendium. And then there is the migration to new system. So those are two kind of questions I think that we can start with that will take us to our next meeting. Okay?
Sure.
How's that sound?
That sounds good.
Good. So, and we'll determine at the end of the meeting when we'll have our next meeting. We don't have to have them every month. We can have them once a quarter. It depends on how much time or the urgency of things. You know, we're just want to keep it loose. I also wanted to see if we could possibly work on taking our own minutes, since we probably won't have a whole lot of action items. Much of it could just be recorded and played back because it's going to be a lot of discussion, relieving Ms. Osbury from having to staff this meeting.
Sure.
It's just one extra meeting and it's brand new. So, and we're trying to look to see if we can do that because we need more hours on regular task force stuff, more core stuff right now. So with regards to the open documents system, I explained a little bit about what was going on there. I think some of the issues that we have to deal with are in relation to migrating whatever we do with regards to our database project is how they're going to appear over there. Should they be stripped and put into plain HTML, which is completely searchable, which can be done if it's properly, if it was properly formatted in a PDF or what have you. I mean, converting into pure HTML from a Word document is pretty hellacious. It's very difficult.
I mean, obviously, we have no power to compel anybody. I would say maybe a first order of business would essentially be to draft sort of, a document with sort of a more general rules of thumb about sort of what is in the public's best interest in terms of document access, i.e. open, text, human readable formats.
Okay.
Non-proprietary form, so that we don't get into the waters of Silverlight versus Flash versus QuickTime or whatever.
Right. Well, we have no choice because the city's moving towards SharePoint, so you have no choice. But that has nothing to do with file format. So
well, I mean, my guess is that SharePoint has some Microsoft flavored XML, right?
Yes.
And so Microsoft has their own XML schema, and that they're probably still text searchable. It's just that they have their own sort of set of tags and classes that are specific to the SharePoint system, but that can be, sort of machine interpreted out in a way that I think former, like translating Word binaries into HTML was a different headache.
okay.
And that's what I mean. So rather than sort of say like, okay, so yes, we understand SharePoint, and I think, yes, it will be good once we have a better understanding of that system, sort of getting, best practices and guidelines for SharePoint access. For instance, creating a document for the public and for city agencies to help them form query strings to sort of, translate spoken questions and requests for documents into the sort of query string that would actually find you that document faster.
So semantic search.
So semantic search, right? But, I mean, it could be simple as presenting essentially word problems like an IDR form, right, thing, and essentially saying, well, here's how to translate that into a regular expression, or how to translate that into search terms and date ranges that you can use. Okay. But see, I, for one, don't know SharePoint well enough to develop that kind of document.
Yeah, I'm really what's going to be most interesting is that they're going to want our involvement because they're not quite sure. What they're just going to do is kind of move everything from the current system on the dozens of other servers, some actually enclosed in a wall that they haven't seen in 25 years.
Yeah.
To into the system, and so there's going to be no work like what we're planning on doing with the database project. There's going to be no interest to do any of that work. They're just going to say, well, just throw all these into the archive, and people will have to fend for themselves. But at least they'll be available, and we'll just start from scratch, from today. And I think what we want to do is try to enhance that as providing advice.
Sure.
I mean,
and that's what I'm essentially saying is,
okay.
the first order of business might be coming up with rules of thumb, i.e., if in an ideal world, what would the Sunshine Ordinance Task Force think about, one document for, like, what considerations would we use in choosing one document format over another?
Okay.
Right? Is the format an open source format? Is the format written in, human readable text as opposed to binary, right? Those kind of guidelines that, if asked, we can essentially say, here is a document that has been voted up or down, I mean, who knows, right, by the full Sunshine Ordinance Task Force to essentially define our position.
Okay.
And I think, I think Member Wolf could draft that.
Yeah, that's not a
And
problem.
it's literally, it's 5 or 6 items, right? If given a choice between a binary format and a text format, choose text, right?
Right, of course.
If, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Because, I have a feeling with SharePoint, it's probably going to, it's not like they're going to be taking a bunch of scanned PDF documents and then running OCR and correcting it in the Exchange. They're still
Right.
going to just have scanned PDF documents.
Right.
But, maybe a suggestion might be when old documents are accessed, take the time to add metadata or to run OCR or to somehow, improve the status.
Or
of
find the original
future
document.
requests, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Or find the original document.
Yeah. Okay, great. Great. Anything else for the good? I think we need that presentation from, and that interface from Department of Technology to kind of see where they're at and how far they've gotten. I know last I heard they were, the airport had provided them with a room, and they were going to have this very elaborate cooling system having to deal with the bay, and some like forced airflow through the room. And then 3 months later, it became two data centers in a can, data centers in a semi, bin. So everybody was really annoyed at that because they had already spent a year budgeting and all that, and they just did a 180 on the department heads. So they were really pissed off, and the controller was mad, the mayor's office was mad, the president of the board was mad. Everybody was really mad that day. So I haven't seen another meeting yet. For probably about 6 months. So I'm not quite sure what's going on right now, but I'll make sure that at least for our next meeting, or at least to get, I'll have a meeting myself with Department of Technology and then create a report. We can do something like that. So that leads us into the next item, which is how exactly will all those documents be organized. And so, Ms. Osbury, if you will please bring up the computer. Yeah, it's already hooked up, I think. It should come up on the screen. There should be a. Yeah, there's already a website that's up there already. There you go. Okay. So this is kind of the newly developed index of records. You don't. I'll come up there. You don't have to manage it. I just want everybody to read it for a moment. And as you can see, this was developed by the GSA and probably also the city attorney's office. And at that time,
This is live?
This is live.
I had no idea.
Right. And supposedly every department's website has a link for a index of records. We have had this discussion before the task force many times where we'll find that, the Department of Public Works has it really laid out well, but the police department is blank. It's just the headings are there, but there's no documents ever have been installed. So I'm going to demonstrate it a little bit for you folks. Turn on this microphone. Yeah, good. So maybe you can hear me by earshot. At least I'll be on tape. Okay, so as you can see, it's broken up into 3 different options. Okay, you can choose by the department name. So here's Public Works. If I click on Public Works, you get the index of records here. And it's broken down by their different departments, these different bureaus. Now, the question is, and I've been trying to find the standard index of records, which I can't anymore. It's not on the website. So that means we'll have to contact the supervisor of records at the city attorney's office, because they're the ones that are supposed to be maintaining that. At least get the basic framework of what the city requires. At one point, I thought it was the city administrator that created it and maintained it, but it's kind of a moving goalpost at this point, so I really can't tell. So you can see, but there's a lot of documentation here. You know, so here's, if we go to political signs, let's say, what does it say? Doesn't really say much, though, does it? It just says, it just gives that there is a report somewhere that exists somewhere, and it gives the member of the public the opportunity to say, I know this exists because it's in the index of records. Please send me a copy. Okay? The question is, you know, are we still back to square one, you know, even though they put it up there? Or is this getting closer? My feeling is because the actual document isn't available, that it doesn't really help that much, except that you can search through what documents are publicly available. And so if somebody were to come in and say, I'm complaining because the Department of Public Works says there's no documents or no reports related to political signs in the city, you know, the complainant can point to this, and the respondent is going to have to make up something or agree that it does exist and produce it. So, you know, the problem is it becomes a huge waste of time again. So, you know, that's why I'm thinking this, you know, that it's really important for us to be involved in the index of records to try and reduce that, because of, you know, a lot of the complaints that we get from either respondents or members of the public or what have you, you know, about how much time it takes and how much time they're wasting, about coming and meeting with us and all that. And really, ultimately, our job is to try and intervene and make it easier for documents to be gotten. So that's how that works. You can search by a document description, so it's kind of an open kind of discussion here. So if let's say I do open meetings. No match for open meetings. So, see, I don't really know what the schema is
Right.
for this database.
And at least in theory, I mean, SharePoint would, you know, should be able to support some public-facing, I mean, it should be able to support some sort of public-facing index of records, just if it is going to be a central point for the entire city's digital document storage system and the interface therefore.
Right.
Then it should be able to generate this automatically.
Right.
And that it's a matter of, you know, making sure that, you know, there is a means by which for city agencies to flag items public or not public, or portions therein not public.
So is there any recommendation that we should make to all the parties involved that manage this particular database right now, so that way we can participate in possibly decision-making, or at least in making strong suggestions? Because obviously this is, you know, while it's better than what had exists, you know, 7 years ago, it's still not complete.
Yeah. I mean, the simplest solution would simply be to expose the same, you know, the SharePoint interface. I mean, in the same way that the SharePoint interface and access is exposed to individual city agencies and parsed with permissions and so on and so forth, it should also just be made available to the public.
Yeah, it's just a matter, I'm talking about how do they transfer everything that's in here over to SharePoint if they're going to create, if we're going to ask them to create a different taxonomy based upon what index of records. I mean, here, I don't really see, when I go through any of these departments, I don't see what I used to see as being the basic requirements for the index of records, like meetings and certain documents and minutes and, you know, and then other stuff that goes on with it. So here it's just kind of like they throw up whatever, you know, and then it's not even the real document. It's just a record. It just shows you where the record is. with SharePoint, you'll at least be able to see the real document. So
Right, and what I'm suggesting is that were the public to have access to SharePoint, it would, I think, at least based on my understanding of what this represents, this would become obsolete.
right.
With the transition to SharePoint, would past documents be migrated over, or would this just be kind of going forward? That's where things are going to be
Like
stored.
I said, yeah, I don't know. That's why we need to have that presentation by Department of Technology, because I have no
Yeah.
idea where they are. From the day they started, they could have redesigned the whole thing, for all I know. And, this is kind of like, it's a hard part because you got to start out with the raw data, and then you got to determine, okay, what is the raw data? And are you sure you're not actually creating a taxonomy of the raw data and not really getting the raw data? So, it's it can be kind of daunting with all this information and so many different departments and categories and tagging and groups of information. It just is, it really is, can be horrendous. So, like I was suggesting for ourselves, for our own database, that we kind of start from today, work our way back, do an assessment of how far back we can go comfortably to try at least to get something going so that we can, the members of the task force can at least refer to orders of determination when making decisions, even DCA 3, or even Ms. Osbury here, when somebody walks in her door and says, I'm complaining about this or that, she has an easy way to look it up and say, the task force already ruled on that. You are absolutely entitled to that document, or no, it's been considered not a public document, and then they can determine whether they want to challenge that by filing a complaint or not. So it really becomes, it really helps everybody all around. It provides our frontline staff with the ability to intervene knowledgeably and with, resources, real hard resources, and it provides us with the ability to be able to agendize things in a more coherent and concise way. So I wanted to just show this to you because that's what exists. So if you notice the URL there, you can go back to it. And just for those at home who are listening to this on tape, the URL is mission, MISSION, sfgov.org/sunindex, SUNINDEX, all one word. And what I'll do is I'll request what the current standard index of record is, because I had expected it to be up here, just as a downloadable PDF to show what's the basic that the city requires of all departments. So, and it's not there. Okay, so our next item is review records retention, including backup and restore policies. Now, what's interesting about this is that for the first time in the history of the Sunshine Task Force, we were able to get a department to restore records and produce them to the complainant. And that was in the George Wooding versus the Rec and Park Department, where no other department would ever attempt or agree to do it. They did. And it was even just for email. So we know that email is much harder to restore than it would be for standard documents, where there are daily backups. It's a lot easier to track down individualized documents than it would be in a flat file of all email. One big file of email. It's hard to search and track down specifics in that. So I think that is something that, again, with the presentation from DT around SharePoint, just to find out what is now going to be their new backup and retention. First of all, what the retention policy is going to be, if that's going to change, first of all. because now they have the ability to, save things ad infinitum. They don't even have to send it off-site.
In theory. In practice, that's rarely how it ends up working.
Right, right. But here we try to shoot for the universe and settle for the treetops. Don't let them push us into the roots. So, but yeah, optimistically, we hope that be the case. So,
well, I mean, some realistic appraisal of the cost of storing a document over time. I mean, the DTIS would be the only people who could give us sort of any sort of back of the envelope number on how much it costs a city agency to store a document over time, or some aggregate of documents over time.
it's true. It's interesting. This is a ongoing conversation all over the blogosphere now, and the interesting thing is that hard drives are pretty cheap, and compression technologies are changing every day.
True.
And and so I hear you about the costs. I don't think they're so much concerned about backup costs as they are about live costs, because when you have large video or images or huge documents,
Yep.
like if they get sent a 5,000 page document and it's in a PDF, it's going to be huge. It's just going to be, versus if it was maybe a Word document, just by virtue of a different file format, it could be, 3 times the size. So, that's what I want to try to query them a little bit about what that will be, because, we've had a couple of cases in dealing with retention, and we've had a lot of resistance to doing that. And most of the resistance is I don't know. Well, that's got to stop. We have to know, so we could tell the people who don't know that they need to contact this person immediately.
I mean, there is no central body for document retention policies. It's up to the agency individually, isn't it?
Yes and no. There is some rules in the California Public Records Act and the Sunshine Task Ordinance. There are some rules elsewhere in the administrative code with regards to like contracts and stuff like that. Each department has a retention set of guidelines with regards to certain things. Like, I don't know if you remember, we had a supervisor that was being challenged to produce certain emails. Now, the thing is that the supervisor himself it was more about the committee that this was about, and whether the committee had retained the information, not necessarily the supervisor. The supervisor wasn't required to retain the information because they were a member of the committee, and the committee provided them with all the information. So it becomes the difference between the Board of Supervisors and its retention policy versus supervisor
The
number
office
one.
of the supervisor, yeah.
Right, individually.
Right.
Not even the office, just the supervisor, him or her person.
Right.
Because the staffer also is a custodian of record themselves individually too. So it's not even you can't even say the office. You really have to name that's why we encourage people to always name a person, because offices don't really, they retain records, so to speak. The planning department retains a lot of records that a lot of people touch. So there really isn't one custodian for like a blueprint, okay? It's like a lot of people touch that blueprint. It just lives in the planning department. So there it would be viable to say, why didn't the planning department produce the document and then hold the department head responsible? Okay, then you got that situation. But if you have somebody went in for a meeting and then they had an email exchange with a supervisor, and then they asked for that email that the supervisor had exchanged with them because they couldn't find it or what have you, and the supervisor says, I never sent you an email. Well, that's what we want the retention information for. We want to be able to say, okay, this just happened like 3 months ago. It's got to still exist, and that kind of thing. So And if their retention policy is true and it says they don't have to keep records for more than 2 weeks, then it may not be appropriate to have it restored. And then it really is up to the Department of Technology to destroy those documents also after the retention period.
Who's setting those standards? I mean, why is it the domain of the Board of Supervisors to decide that its policy would be something like documents should only be retained for 2 weeks? It seems like, we should have something to say about that. That doesn't seem appropriate. I think that was just a hypothetical example, but if it were 2 weeks, that seems like they should be around for longer than that.
I would agree. It seems common sense and seems somewhat ethical, but the law is the law, and where the law is silent, sometimes people say, well, where the law is silent, that means I can do it. Other people would say, well, where the law is silent, you can't do it.
Well, so this is maybe getting down to your sort of sub-point here, but that could be a potential amendment that we can think of to the ordinance, because right now it sort of it relegates the determination of retention policies to the agencies themselves, and it just says they have to comply with their own policies. But we could develop a baseline policy. It doesn't seem unreasonable to say that all correspondence should be retained for at least a year. Something like that. I think it should be retained for longer than that.
Well, I agree. I mean, you would think, look, the city has off-site hard paper storage in lots of places, and there are provisions in the ordinance where it says if somebody has to go to one of those remote places, you'd have to pay for it, and when at their leisure. You don't expect to get it in 24 hours on an IDR. It just isn't going to happen, especially if it's out in Illinois somewhere, that kind of thing. So, so here what we're trying to do is solve that problem by saying you don't need to save hard paper anymore.
Right.
There's no reason to. Everything should be done electronically. And those items that are not done electronically, that are delivered in paper, there's got to be a different retention policy.
What I have noticed, at least just anecdotally, is that creates a giant loophole whereby business is just conducted on paper.
It's true, and they can do that, and that's okay. You just create a retention policy. Just needs to be created that is salient for the public to get access to the information. That's all that really has to happen. So it's really 2 retention policies.
Right.
It's also just more and more becoming the case that the original document is being created electronically.
Yes.
And I think, it's, if and when that is the case, which it is becoming the case more and more frequently, there's no excuse for that not to be retained.
Right. We had, the situation with the Arts Commission, that street artist program, where, was it originally done on tape or was it originally done digitally? And then they created a copy digitally, and then it's calling it original, and it's like,
right.
A cassette recording, tape recording is really hard paper. It's not really, it's
Right.
on its way to being electronic, so to speak. So,
something that I think at least I don't know. I don't know what the best way to phrase it is. It seems like a good sort of standard, at least for the way to think about it. If not, for some, I don't know if there's any way we can attack this with actual language, amendment-wise. But it seems like really the rule of thumb should be, if and when possible, a record should be created electronically. Obviously, if you're taking notes on a pad of paper in a meeting, that's that. But if there's an official document, everything's being drafted on a computer at this point. There's no reason why.
well, that's true, except for like the notes I'm writing on my agenda is
Sure,
a public document. So
That's what I mean. Like, if you're
it's-
taking notes on a meeting, yeah, sure. But
yeah, I hear you. So the ongoing, I'm not planning on trying to ferret out all the intricacies today on this, but just these are some thoughts that we need to have as we move forward, because it has come before us, and we need to what we experience, because Department of Technology, they're just providing the means for getting this stuff up online. Microsoft folks, when I first met them, they gave me their card. They wanted to talk. They felt it was important because we probably would be more inclined to know how, the end of what needs to be public versus not. And then they work with each and every department to determine what documents they need to have available to them inside their department. So, there's kind of, it's a multi-layer kind of thing. So I think from this point forward, if we, for our next meeting, if we can come up with just some ideas that we can talk about with regards to making recommendations for document retention, records retention, and backup and restoral policies, I think that would be, it would help us greatly move this forward. Mm-hmm. Anything else for the good of cause on that one? Okay. Next item is timeline. So timeline, I'm just thinking about, so for like the orders of determination database, do we want to put a date when we will have a next step, a milestone, a task done? Should we create some sort of project management for this if it keeps it organized and on, and on schedule? Do we want to have a launch date of some sort, a pilot launch date, and if so, when, that kind of thing?
I think we should, because to me this seems like the first thing that we could really get done. It is definitely something within our grasp, and I think we should. It seems like a first step. I don't know how you feel about contacting Adriel Hampton, if you think that would be a good idea.
Sure.
to try to see if we can get some people just spend a day working on it. Mm-hmm. I'm also happy to, and it sounds like we all would be, to just look at it and see if we can get a better sense of what the logic, of the structure.
Sure.
I mean, I would say maybe have a goal for, I don't know what the timeline would be, but essentially within, the quarter or a month or something like that, just a day to sit down and work, and like a working day to deal with it.
So sometime before like April 30th?
Sure.
And
That works for me.
with Data SF to identify resources, identify the scope of work necessary,
Mm-hmm.
and to come up with some sort of project plan.
Right.
Because I think that essentially, we're going to need some expertise volunteered, and they would be a good opportunity to identify that resource.
Right. And we want to invite members of the public who've been,
Sure.
chomping at the bit for this for a long time. So, I think, okay, so April 30th.
It's striking me too that making this available to the public would really open up a lot. It would really empower complainants to make convincing cases for willful failure. Mm-hmm. If you have cases of repeat violators, you see this again and again and again.
Right. That's true. Okay. So anything else any other items of interest at this point? That's a pretty full plate, I think we got. So let's call for public comment, and seeing no public to comment, we will then move to announcements, comments, questions, or Ms. Clerk, please call the next item. Thank you.
Item number 6, announcements, comments, questions, future agenda items.
Anything for the good of cause? Okay. All right. And so motion to adjourn?
Second.
You're seconding? You're motioning?
Sure, I so moved.
Okay, great. Okay, we are adjourned at 6:38. Thank you.